For today's episode, I want to start by addressing something that might be already crossing your mind when you look at the title of this, which is why am I spending an entire episode talking about my year? Um, isn't this podcast for other people and their stories and their patterns and generations and their mess? And yes, it is, absolutely. But I also believe strongly that we learn through the stories of other people. And because they open doors, in us, they give us perspective. They show us that we're not alone in our thoughts, that we're sometimes afraid to say out loud. They help us understand the people around us and sometimes the people who came before us. And I have to say that this year, 2025, this year changed me, not in a shiny, inspirational way, in a very human, painful, humbling way. And because this podcast is about understanding why we do what we do, why our generations behave the way they behave, and why navigating life, mental health, and work feels so complicated. And it feels important to share, the actual lived experience behind the person talking into this microphone. Um, I think there's this unspoken belief that therapists and coaches that we don't crumble, that we don't have problems, or that we can handle every problem perfectly, that we're somehow above the chaos. And some of that is because we understand the tools, because if you are practicing what you preach and you understand the tools, you don't always fall apart, maybe like everyone else. But even if you have the tools, even if you have all the information, we still fall apart. We still struggle because I know my therapist and coach friends do, and I do too. And this year forced me to live every single thing that I teach. It forced me to confront the parts of life that no training prepares you for. So I'm sharing all of this not to center everything on me, but because it's real. Um, and this year taught me some things that I don't think I would have really understood otherwise if I hadn't been through everything that I've been through. So let me tell you a little bit about this year. So this was the year where every layer of my identity got, I guess this is a very trendy word, activated all at once. I wasn't just Tess the therapist or Tess the mother or Tess the daughter or wife or coach or business owner. I was all of them simultaneously in crisis mode. This year, my father passed away, and losing him felt like, losing this big emotional anchor in my life. This person whose presence, even when quiet, because my father was not a talker, really shaped me and shaped the rhythm of my life. And while I'm still absorbing that loss, while I'm still going through this, I've also been dealing with my mom's health beginning to unravel on two different fronts, right? So January 3rd of this year, that 2025, she broke her foot. What started as a physical injury becomes, for an older patient, right, an older parent, especially, like a landslide. My sister and I quickly had to find an assisted living facility because our mother was living alone. Parents are divorced. Mother was living alone, and dementia was already kicking in. She couldn't remember if she had taken her meds or if she had eaten that day. So we already saw it happening. And then when she broke her foot, it felt like, okay, this is our opportunity to make this change. So, while she was at the skilled nursing facility, we, moved a bunch of stuff out of her house into this new residential place, got it all set up, went to Target a million times, set up the room, got all of our belongings. We then had to clean out her house completely, sell it and all while trying to kind of stabilize our mother's sense of identity in the midst of all this change, because she also was struggling with all these changes and changes that she did not choose, which is really, really tough because change is hard no matter what. But when you have to change, when a change is forced upon you, that's very, very different. Think about COVID. Think about things like that where, oh, I didn't choose this, but now it's affecting every aspect of my life. And what we've seen this last year with our mom, when I say we, I talk about my sister and I. What we've seen is that she's memory has declined, slipping. There's a lot of confusion. Her personality has shifted, and so I've also had to grapple with, suddenly the mother that I always knew isn't really fully here anymore. She's gone. And then again, recently in the last couple months, we had to move her, not even the last couple months, in the last month, we had to move her again because she fell again and hit her head, and it was not good. And because of her mobility issues and her memory issues, we then had to move her again to memory care. Same facility, but again, we had to go through her this apartment that we had just moved her into, this cute little apartment that we found for her, just moved all of those things out and pare things down and go through this process again. And each time it's been this, my sister and I have had to kind of go through and get rid of more and more of my mom's stuff or give it away or whatever it is to get her down to like now living in this one room. And that itself, it's not just logistics. It feels like grief because it feels like, oh, I know this isn't what she wants, this isn't what we want, but we don't have a choice. So this is also the year that I realized how differently physical decline and mental decline impact us. When my mom broke her foot, it felt like, okay, this is a problem to solve, a setback, but something we can manage and doctors and appointments and all of that. Physical decline makes sense. We know this. It has a timeline, even if it's difficult. Mental decline, that's a different story. It's a different kind of heartbreak. It hits the places that we don't necessarily always have names for, right? Because you're watching your parent not just losing abilities, you're losing parts of this relationship that you had with them. You're losing the continuity of who that person has always been. So it's almost like watching a photograph fade while you're still holding on to it. It's that this is really going to date me. Only other Gen Xers and above will know this one, but like Back to the Future, Marty McFly, where they start to disappear, right? And so that what I found is that grief is layered over, this grief of also losing my father. So losing the person that held, losing the person, but also the place, that my father held in the world, the steadiness that he brought, his, the way his voice, sometimes it was kind of hang tough mantra, you can do this, you got this. It really grounded me. And I know it grounded my sister. And suddenly within 1 year or within really a 6-month period, my sister and I became the adults, the real adults, the only adults. There was no one else above us to defer to. We were the ones making all the decisions and all the decisions that nobody really wants to make. And so as all of this was happening in the background of my life, I kept thinking about these generational patterns showing up in, real time, right? Without even noticing it. And of course, I always go back to the generations because this is the topic that I love to discuss. But, my parents are actually technically part of the silent generation. They were both born in 1943, but they very much, boomers, that generation started in 45. So they definitely identify with boomers. And so, independence is very much woven into their identity. To them, needing help is not just frustrating, it feels humiliating. And I saw that clearly with both of my parents because it feels like a loss of self, right? So every shift in my mom's care just wasn't just a practical change, right? It was this emotional injury in a sense, like to her autonomy. And that reaction is generational. Her generation wasn't always taught to name emotions or ask for support or to adjust gently to vulnerability, which is really what both my parents had to go through this year. And then I think about my generation and my sister's generation, Gen X, which, we're the cushion in the middle of things, right? Many of us are caring for aging parents while also parenting kids who need more emotional support than ever. That's me because my son's still home. We were raised to be resourceful, self-reliant, uncomplaining. We didn't grow up with parents that always entirely cushioned our anxieties. We didn't talk directly about mental health. So I find that caregiving hits us in a very particular way, right? We automatically assume we should be able to handle everything. And we don't always know how to ask for help. We often don't realize that we need help until we're drowning. Millennials, meanwhile, right, are very aware of burnout. They really understand it. And they are, they were the first generation to really kind of push um, mental health and boundaries, because they're redefining boundaries because they've watched their parents and older siblings sacrifice themselves to this point of exhaustion, right? And now Gen Z is showing us something even new or something even more, right? They name their feelings, they acknowledge the anxiety out loud, they don't pretend to be fine, they don't attach shame to struggle. And watching my son navigate his own mental health challenges this year reminded me of how much, I admire that. My son is part of a generation that sees seeking help as normal, not a failure. So every generation, right, brings something different to the table. And when you're in the middle of a year like the one I've had, you see those differences up close. This year also taught me a lot more about mental health than I even knew. Less from the lens of a therapist and more as the lens of a human being. I was reminded that you cannot process emotions while you're in this survival mode. When you're actively caretaking and grieving or organizing or planning, your nervous system is really not in a place of introspection. It's just trying to get you through the day, and it's almost storing your emotions for later. So when, the crisis slows down, when the phone stops ringing, right, when there's nothing left to coordinate, that's when everything kind of hits you. And I felt that I was going through that every day, between going back and forth between the survival mode of the logistics and the things that I needed to get done that day, not only for my parents, but also for myself and my son and my husband and all of that, my business. And and then having these quiet moments of, oh wow, this has all happened. This is your life now. I've also learned that grief is cumulative. Each new loss that you witness awakens older ones. When my mom, declined and has been declining, even though my parents have been divorced for a very long time, the feeling, the absence, my father's absence, it feels more deeply because there's not him to go to. When my sister and I had to make decisions for her, we both felt feelings of guilt and unsureness, but also just this feeling of loss of who she used to be and who she was. Grief is rarely one thing. It is very, very layered. And I learned that caretaking and caregiving is love in action, but it's also this anticipate, you're also anticipating grief. So every time I go see my mom, every time my sister and I would move her, all of these things, it's like this act of care and you want to be there, but you also, you have to acknowledge that something's happening that you don't want to happen. And that duality between I love my mother, I want her to have a happy, healthy end of her life, and that, the seeing her decline every single time, that duality, it's exhausting. I also learned that you can function highly even while carrying around profound sadness. I still showed up for my clients, my child, and work, all of those other things. And that's not me being a hypocrite. It's really about me being human. Um, I learned that asking for the help that I needed is not an admission of inadequacy, right? It's an act of maturity, even though it felt uncomfortable at times. Um, I realized that, as much as my parents who always had these expressions, my father's was always hang tough. Like I said, my mom always had this buck up, buckaroo. My parents were really incredibly kind and caring people, but right, there was a lot of, for them, it was very much like, hey, life is hard. You can do this. Go get them. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that my parents taught me that, because it has positively affected me in a lot of different ways. It's allowed me to build this business, to have podcasts that I've stuck with, to have written a book, all of these things, that their belief in me and their drive and like, you can do this, you can handle this, helped me tremendously. But it also created this feeling of I don't need other people, or I don't need your help, or I don't need this, or I don't need that, or breaking down or having hard times or dealing with hard things, don't worry about that. Buck up, right? So, the other thing that I realized about losing my parents this year, whether it's physically or mentally, is it kind of rearranges something inside of you. You begin to kind of understand your own place in the family timeline differently. You realize, right, that you're now the one that holds the history. You're the one that has to share with your child and their children, this is who these were our parents. This is who they are. And so as I look towards this new year, which I'm very excited about, I have to say, I've been thinking about what each generation can learn, right, from the others. And I believe that, Gen Z's best quality is their emotional honesty, and it's something that they all need. I think millennials' insistence on avoiding burnout or is something that we can all respect in many ways. Gen X, our ability to push through hard things is admirable, but we also need to learn softness and support. And Boomer's sense of loyalty and responsibility, it's grounding, but they also show us the cost of never asking for help. Every generation holds wisdom and they also hold blind spots. So, as we enter into the new year, I'm thinking about what I want to carry with me and what do I want to leave behind. So, what I'm carrying with me is perspective, a deeper appreciation for the people who matter in my life, a clearer sense of what deserves my energy, and what doesn't deserve my energy. I've recognized that mental health isn't about and I've known this for a long time, but it's like when you're going through it, it's hard to remember. But mental health isn't about eliminating struggle because there are always going to be struggles. It's about staying connected to yourself as you move through it. It's about staying connected to who you are and meeting your own needs as you move through it. And sometimes that's asking for help. I'm going to carry on my father's hang tough and the buck up attitude, but I'm going to use that not as a reminder to push through. I'm just going to use it as a reminder to stay steady, to stay present, to stay open. What I'm leaving behind is the belief that I must hold everything together alone for everyone all the time. I'm leaving behind the generational conditioning that says, expressing my needs is weakness and you have to do everything on your own and be independent, right? I'm leaving behind the illusion that being strong means that you're never touched by pain. And I'm also leaving behind the idea that resilience requires stoicism because it doesn't. Because what I've learned, especially my father, who was very, very stoic, as much as it helped him in some ways, it really did prevent him, I think, from being able to live his life in a really rich way, a way that I've been able to. Um, just simply because of the time in which I was born, the things that I'm interested in, and the fact that I didn't want to be stoic. I didn't want to push people away. I've always been a sensitive person. So I wanted to, instead of seeing that as a bad thing, I wanted to use it as a good thing to help my clients, to help myself, to help my son. So, wherever you are right now and whatever this year has looked like for you, I hope you take a minute to just acknowledge what you carried, what you held, what you survived. Just making it through a year, especially a heavy one, is an accomplishment worth honoring. So, thank you for being here with me, for listening, for allowing me to share the real parts of this work and this life. Thank you for caring about all the messy stories that we've talked about, the generational patterns and the human truths behind, what's underneath them. And I'm grateful for all of you as we move into this new year. I hope you all hang tough, but gently hang tough. Hang tough in a way that lets you soften, and hang tough in a way that lets you feel supported and human. And I will see you all or speak to you all next year.